The fluorescent lights in our clinical ops wing always buzzed a little, this low, irritating hum that blended with the smell of burnt coffee and antiseptic wipes. I'd gotten used to it over the years, just another texture of startup life in health tech. But that morning, it felt like the sound was drilling straight into my skull. My hands were already clammy when I opened the shared financial drive, mostly because I knew something was wrong, but I didn't yet understand how wrong. The spreadsheet flickered for a second before loading, those green and blue cells I'd stared at 1,000 times. Nothing looked unusual at first: trial budgets, vendor invoices, CRO timelines. Then I saw it, a line item formatted wrong. One cell showing a number that didn't match its formula. 4 digits too few. I frowned and clicked into the formula bar. The cursor blinked back at me. Someone had hard-coded a value where a function should have been. My stomach dropped. That wasn't a mistake, that was intent. The HVAC breathed a cold draft across my ankles. I pulled the file backups from yesterday, then the day before. Same cell, same override. And the further back I went, the worse it got. A quiet pattern emerged, small discrepancies, all conveniently in our favor, like someone had been nudging cost projections down one tweak at a time. My throat tightened. I opened the CRO invoice folder, my fingers trembling just a little as I dragged the latest PDF next to the budget model. The numbers didn't match, not even close. The invoice showed a $312,000 phase expansion charge I'd never approved, but in the model, the line was magically flattened to $40,000. I could feel my pulse thudding in my jaw. A metallic tang slid across my tongue. Something else about the invoice caught my eye. It had been uploaded by Daniel, our CFO, at 2:17 a.m. The timestamp glared at me like a confession. I whispered, "No, no, no." But the room stayed silent, except for the buzz and the faint clicking sound of someone typing 3 desks away. I opened the prior month's invoice. Same pattern, and the month before that. The discrepancies added up fast, too fast. When I tallied them across all 6 trial sites, I felt the breath leave my body. $4,712,000. Unaccounted for, hidden, buried inside a mess of overwritten formulas and manually coded cells. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling tiles, each square blurring into the next. I wanted to believe I was misreading something, that there was some benign explanation. But then another thought hit me with cold clarity. The FDA preliminary audit was in 9 days. If they found out we'd misreported trial expenditures, intentionally or not, we'd lose the partnership. The whole company would go under. I clicked back into the financial model, scrolling to the change log. Most entries were standard adjustments, but then I hit the one line that iced my spine. Revised per CFO direction, maintain optics pre-audit. My fingers froze. Maintain optics. And that's when I knew Daniel had betrayed me. The realization sat heavy in my chest, almost too heavy to breathe with. I swallowed hard, staring at that glowing screen because I suddenly understood. This wasn't just bad judgment. This was fraud. And if I didn't figure out how deep it went, everything I'd built over the last 7 years was going to collapse right under me. I exhaled shakily. And then I opened the next folder, because I had to know what else he'd touched. The clinic's waiting room was always too warm, like the thermostat had given up trying to fight the California sun. I remember that heat the first time I met Daniel, how it clung to my skin as I carried 2 mock-ups of our patient monitoring dashboard into that overcrowded Medical Innovation Expo in San Diego. Funny how I can still smell the cheap carpet and stale pretzels they tried to pass off as snacks. I wasn't planning to stay long. I just needed to pitch 3 prospective CROs and head back to Oakland before traffic turned hellish. But then he walked up to me. I was kneeling beside our tiny booth, wrestling with a banner stand that refused to lock into place, when I heard a smooth voice behind me say, "Need a second pair of hands." I turned and saw him, tall, crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, CEO-style Patagonia vest, hair neatly combed like he'd never known stress a day in his life. He smiled, the kind of polite smile that seemed practiced. The kind that was meant to reassure. "Thanks," I said, letting him snap the final hinge into place like it was nothing. "Didn't expect to be doing manual labor today." He chuckled. "I'm Daniel, CFO for Verita's clinical group. but don't worry, I moonlight as an amateur handyman. I remember thinking he had a nice laugh. Harmless, helpful, the kind of person you didn't mind being stuck in a long investor meeting with. That your platform? He asked, pointing at the dashboard on my laptop. Real-time compliance tracking. Among other things, I said, and I launched into the pitch I'd been refining for months. I told him about our vision, about improving trial oversight for mid-size biotech firms who couldn't afford bloated legacy systems, about bringing transparency to trial deviations that usually disappeared into spreadsheets no one read. He listened closely, nodding, his eyes flicking between the screen and my face. When I finished, he said, "You built something impressive. You bootstrapped this. Grant-funded at first, then angels, now heading toward a Series A." He whistled softly. "That's gutsy, but it'll pay off." I didn't realize then how his compliments always came wrapped in a subtle judgment: gutsy, implying reckless; ambitious, implying naive; visionary, implying ungrounded. I was too proud of my work to hear the quiet contradictions. We talked for nearly an hour. He asked smart questions, 2 specific ones, details about trial budget workflows, CRO relationships, audit prep processes, things only someone deep in the weeds of clinical finance would know to ask. When he said, "If you ever need a CFO who gets this space, call me," I felt a flicker of something like relief. I'd been drowning in the financial side of the business for months: burn rate calculations, vendor negotiations, trial cost modeling. I could architect a compliance AI with my eyes closed, but running the numbers on multi-site clinical budgets. No founder wants to admit they're barely holding that together with duct tape. I took his card. We met a week later for coffee in Jack London Square, the air heavy with the smell of roasted beans and salt from the bay. He wore the same calm smile, the same easy charm. "Look," he said, stirring his espresso, "your projections are solid, but you need someone who's lived through audits, who can translate what your tech does into what regulators understand." "And you're that guy?" I asked. He grinned. "Trust me." I should have paid more attention to that phrase even then. But I didn't. I was tired, I was overwhelmed, and he seemed like the lifeline I'd been begging the universe for. So when he asked, if we worked together, what would partnership look like? I answered without hesitation. We talked equity, responsibilities, board structure, audit cycles. He sounded so knowledgeable, so steady, so exactly what I needed. By the time our cups were empty, I believed him. That was my first mistake. Because 3 months later, he was sitting across from me in our new office, wearing that same Patagonia vest, telling me I was being too emotional about the numbers he was already doctoring behind my back. And the worst part, I actually believed him then too. The first big contract felt like adrenaline poured straight into my bloodstream. I still remember standing in the middle of our cramped Oakland office, just 12 mismatched desks, a fridge that hummed like it was dying, and a whiteboard covered in arrows and FDA timelines, when the email from Silveridge Biopharma came in. $780,000 for a Phase II trial oversight pilot. I read it 3 times before I shouted. Daniel was the first to reach me. "See," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "Told you would get something real before Q3, trust me." That phrase again, trust me, I didn't even flinch yet. The company grew fast after that, too fast, probably. We raised a $3.2 million seed round at an $8 million pre-money valuation, hired a clinical ops lead, 2 data engineers, and a trial compliance specialist, started building infrastructure for multi-site trial oversight. And every investor meeting, every vendor negotiation, Daniel was right there, calm smile, crisp deck edits, steady voice. But the red flags were already forming. I just kept smoothing them over. The first one came on a Thursday morning in February. I'd arrived early, the office smelling like burnt toast, because someone had murdered a bagel in the communal toaster again. I'd been reviewing AWS billing, my fingers still stiff from the cold, when I noticed a spike that didn't match our workload. "Hey," I called out as Daniel walked in with his usual oat milk latte. "This invoice, there's a 40% increase in S3 usage. That doesn't track with our trial volume." He didn't even walk over, just leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed. Probably a fluke. A 40% fluke. You're spinning, he said, shaking his head with that patronizing calmness he used like a weapon. You've been stressed about the Silver Ridge expansion. Don't let this distract you. I'm not distracted, I'm asking a question. He sipped his latte, and I'm telling you you're being emotional about this. The word hit me like a slap, but I swallowed it. I didn't want to seem defensive, didn't want to play into the stereotype he was already implying. Fine, I muttered, but flag it for the ops review. Of course, he said, already walking away. He never flagged it. Another warning came when he overpromised in front of a client. We were in a conference room with Dr. Neves from Cedars West Clinical Network, the scent of lemon disinfectant sharp in the air. She asked if we could deliver anomaly classification by Q3, something we had not discussed internally. We can guarantee it, Daniel said smoothly. I shot him a look so sharp it could have sliced glass. After the meeting, I cornered him near the elevators. We can't deliver that, not by Q3. He shrugged, we'll figure it out. No, I said, heat rising in my throat. I'll figure it out because you just volunteered engineering. It's called selling the dream, he murmured. You engineer the reality, don't get so reactive. Reactive, emotional, spinning. I didn't realize how consistently he used those words to shrink me. The third red flag arrived in subtler form. Daniel started wearing an expensive watch, something sleek and silver that definitely didn't come from his stated salary. Then he traded in his Prius for a BMW. At first I thought, good for him. But then I noticed the secretive calls he took in the hallway, his voice dropping to a hushed whisper whenever I walked by. When I asked what was going on, he smiled and said, nothing you need to worry about. I told myself I was overthinking it. A founder's paranoia, normal growing pains. But none of it felt normal. And late one night, alone in the office with only the rattle of the vents and the glow of the server logs reflecting off the windows, I caught him on Slack deleting message threads. Not even subtly, just entire chains vanishing. I stared at the empty channel for a long minute, my pulse thudding, but I didn't say anything. Because I still wanted to believe in him. I shouldn't have. The cursor blinked at me like it had something to say. My eyes burned from staring at cells and PDFs for too long, but I couldn't stop. Not now, not with the truth sitting just beneath the surface like a bruise. The office was mostly empty except for the soft clicking of keyboards in the distance and the hum of the HVAC pushing out air that somehow felt colder than usual. My fingertips were numb, but I kept going. I opened the clinical vendor folder again, dragging our CRO contracts beside the invoices. The discrepancy wasn't isolated, it was systemic. Every time a site reported a deviation, there was a corresponding adjustment in our model, except the adjustments were always downward. Never up, never balanced. Always in the direction that made us look cleaner, cheaper, more controlled than we were. I clicked into the metadata details of the overwritten cells. Edited by Daniel. Edited by Daniel. Edited by Daniel. The timestamps were a pattern. 1:48 a.m., 2:17 a.m., 3:06 a.m. late-night edits when no one else was online, slipping in changes the audit logs would only catch if someone looked closely. My throat tightened. I pulled the server logs for the shared drive to cross-check access. Every entry showed his login. I followed the trail to the back-end storage. He'd moved files, renamed folders, re-uploaded PDFs with subtle changes. A phrase on page 3 of one invoice had been altered. Phase expansion approved verbally. I knew damn well no such approval had been given. I hadn't even been in the country the day he supposedly greenlit it. The pit in my stomach turned molten. I opened our project timeline for the FDA partnership. Each milestone was tied to a cost model. Each cost model was tied to the clinical expansion, and each expansion was tied to the numbers he'd falsified. If the FDA cross-referenced our reports with actual vendor invoices, they'd flag it immediately. And that wasn't just a slap on the wrist. That was sanctions. That was partnership termination. That was the end of 7 years of my life. My hands started shaking so hard I had to put them in my lap for a moment. I tried to breathe, but my chest felt tight, air catching halfway like my lungs were refusing to cooperate. I looked around the office, quiet, dim, only the glow of monitors here and there. Everything felt too still, like the building itself knew something was wrong. I forced my hands back to the keyboard. Next folder, email exports. I filtered by sender, opened the most recent chain between Daniel and our CRO liaison. There it was, keep numbers aligned pre-audit. We need optics stable for board. My stomach dropped through the floor. Another email, don't worry, I'll clean the variance before Alexis reviews. Before Alexis reviews. Clean the variance. Keep optics stable. I tasted metal again. Then the worst one of all, a message to one of the trial managers, timestamped 3 weeks ago. She's too emotional about cost overruns. I'll handle it internally. Just keep sending raw invoices to me directly. My vision went white around the edges. I had to grip the side of the desk to steady myself. I clicked into the next folder, shell companies, vendor records, anything that might tie to those adjustments. And there it was, a newly incorporated entity with a vague name, Medfield Analytics LLC, created 4 months ago. The contact email, a personal Gmail account I knew belonged to Daniel. One of our largest invoice adjustments had been processed through that entity. A shell company. He'd routed clinical overages through a shell company, the kind of scheme you read about in SEC enforcement bulletins. I wasn't overthinking, I wasn't emotional, I wasn't spinning. He was stealing, he was lying, and he was counting on me not to notice. I hit print. Page after page slid out, invoice mismatches, metadata logs, shell company filings. I stacked them on my desk, each sheet heavier than the last. And then I found the smoking gun. The subject line read, "If she sees this, we're done." I opened it, heart hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. The email said, "Don't send her the raw numbers yet, I'll massage them for the audit." Massage. Like he was kneading dough. Like $4.7 million of fraud was just cosmetic work. My breath caught in my throat. The words on that screen made my heart stop. And exactly then, I knew, this wasn't a misunderstanding, this wasn't stress, this wasn't sloppy accounting. This was deliberate. This was betrayal. And it was only the beginning. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a second. I changed into sweatpants at some point, but I never left my desk. The office emptied around me, lights shutting off one row at a time until only the emergency exit signs glowed in that eerie dim red. I sat there in the half-dark with a stack of printed evidence beside me, scrolling through email exports until my eyes felt raw. By 6 a.m., my hands were trembling so badly I spilled coffee twice. My body felt hollow, jittery, like I'd been running even though I hadn't moved for hours. I kept replaying things Daniel had said over the past year. "You're overreacting. You're too emotional. Don't spin on this. Let me handle it, trust me." Each phrase now felt like a knife turned slowly. Around 8:12 a.m., after pacing the hallway until my knees hurt, I called outside counsel. My voice sounded thin even to me. "Morning, Alexis," he answered, the rustle of papers in the background. "What's going on?" "I found something," I said quietly. "Major discrepancies in our clinical cost models, intentional ones." He exhaled sharply. "Intentional, are you saying fraud?" "I have invoice mismatches, overwritten formulas, shell company routing." "Hold on," he cut in. "Evidence or proof, we need to be careful with language." "It is proof," I snapped louder than I meant. "I have the emails." He said he had to massage the numbers. He directed invoices to himself, "Alexis," he interrupted again, voice lowering, "if you move too early, he'll erase everything. Or worse, claim you're misinterpreting internal variance. Fraud is a legal firestorm. Once you throw that match, we can't unthrow it." "So what do I do?" "For now, nothing public. Don't confront him, don't notify the board, document everything and wait." "Wait," my voice cracked. "The FDA audit is in 9 days, we can't wait." Silence. Then he said something that chilled me more than the fraud itself. "Are you sure you're not reacting emotionally because of previous conflicts with him?" I closed my eyes, the room tilted. I said quietly, "We're done here," and hung up. 30 minutes later, I called Aaron, our only semi-reasonable board member. He picked up on the second ring. Morning, Alexis, everything okay? No, I said. Daniel cooked the numbers. There's at least $4.7 million unaccounted for. A pause, long enough for my skin to prickle. Then, that's a serious accusation. I have the evidence. Have you had anyone verify it? I just spent the entire night verifying it. He exhaled and I could picture him rubbing his forehead. Let's not jump to conclusions. Clinical billing can be messy. Variance happens. Maybe Daniel was trying to protect runway optics before the audit. Optics, I whispered. You think this is about optics? I think founders under pressure sometimes read threat into normal turbulence. Normal turbulence. My pulse thundered. So you don't believe me, I said flatly. I'm saying let's wait for clarity. Wait, another man telling me to wait, while the company I built bled out behind me. I ended the call without saying goodbye. By late afternoon, my sister called. I almost didn't answer, but I knew she'd worry. You sound weird, she said immediately. Have you eaten? No. Did you sleep? No. Lex, what's going on? I stared at the spreadsheets glowing on my monitor. I think my CFO is stealing from me. Silence, then softly, oh honey. I don't know what to do, I whispered. My throat tightened so hard I couldn't swallow. No one believes me. Do you believe you? I didn't answer. Because believing myself meant accepting a truth that would blow up everything. The company, the audit, the board, my career, my sanity, my reputation. I pressed the heel of my hand against my eyes. I stayed like that for a long, shaking minute. When I finally looked up, the office was empty again. The glow of the screen reflected my face, exhausted, scared, furious. It hit me all at once. No one was coming to save me. If this company was going to survive, I had to do it myself. The moment it clicked, truly clicked, was around 11 p.m., when the building was quiet enough that I could hear my own breathing echo against the conference room glass. I'd been staring at the pile of evidence, the printouts scattered around me like crime scene photos, when a thought slipped in so quietly I almost didn't notice it. You're not wrong, you're alone. And for the first time since the whole nightmare started, I didn't feel panic. I felt clarity. There was one person who would believe me. One person who knew the architecture of our data flows better than anyone else, including Daniel. One person who didn't care about politics or optics, or who would look bad when the truth came out. Riley. I hadn't talked to her in nearly a year, not since she left our company for a forensics startup down in Palo Alto. She'd been the first security engineer I ever hired, a brilliant, sarcastic, deeply loyal whirlwind of a human who could trace a data breach blindfolded. And we'd built the original trial compliance logging system together, sitting in the old office with takeout containers piled between us. I pulled up Slack, typing her name slowly, my fingers stiff. Mate. Need a friend, not official. You available tonight? The dots started moving almost instantly. Riley. Bring coffee. This sounds like a long one. My throat tightened with something like relief. An hour later, she walked into the office wearing sweats, high tops, and the same old army green jacket she refused to replace. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, and she carried 2 giant coffees like they were weapons. She stopped when she saw me. Jesus, she said, setting everything down. Who fucked you over? I laughed, a small broken sound, but I laughed. Daniel. Her eyebrows shot up. CFO Daniel, vest-wearing, always calm, spreadsheet whispered Daniel. That one. What'd he do? I handed her the printouts without a word. She flipped through them, her eyes narrowing, her breath slowing. The only sounds in the room were the soft sliding of paper and the hum of the vents overhead. After a minute, she said, "Tell me everything." I did, for nearly 20 minutes without stopping, my voice cracking, my hands shaking, the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry insects above us. I told her about the overwritten formulas, the late-night access logs, the shell company, the she's too emotional emails, every detail, every betrayal, every time he'd made me question myself. When I finished, I felt hollow again, like I'd spilled something precious and irreversible onto the floor. Riley didn't speak. She just set the papers down carefully, like handling evidence in a courtroom. Then she said very softly, "Alexis, he's been doing this for months." "I know. And he's good." She pointed at the altered formula chain. "This is subtle as hell manipulation. Most auditors wouldn't catch this." "I know," I whispered. She looked up at me with that razor-sharp stare of hers. "But he made mistakes." My heart stuttered. "What mistakes?" "Timestamps, metadata, fingerprints. He tried to hide them, but he's sloppy at 3 a.m. Most people are." She pushed her coffee toward me. "Drink, you look like you're vibrating." I took a sip, even though it was cold by now, just to have something solid in my hands. "So what do?" I asked. Riley leaned back, crossing her arms. "First, you breathe. Then we build a full timeline, every altered cell, every routing change, every email. Then we create a mirror environment so he can't destroy evidence. Then we notify the board only after the trap is already sprung." "A trap?" She smiled, not a kind smile, something sharper. "We're going to nail him, but we do it right." A warmth spread through my chest, small but steady, the first flicker of strength I'd felt in days. "Okay," I said, "let's do it." Riley cracked her knuckles and pulled her laptop from her bag. "Good, because we're not sleeping tonight." And for the first time since this started, I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. The next 2 weeks felt like living in two separate realities. Outside, I played the composed CEO guiding a rapidly scaling health tech company. Inside, I was a live wire, every nerve pulled tight as Riley, and I unraveled the truth thread by brutal thread. I'd wake up each morning with my stomach knotted, pull on a blazer that smelled faintly of last night's stress sweat, and walk into the office pretending I wasn't watching the man who'd gutted my company from the inside. Every day, Daniel greeted me with the same calm smile, the same soft "Morning, Alexis," the same faint cedar cologne. And every day I felt the urge to wipe that expression off his face with the stack of evidence piling up on my desk. But I didn't. I kept my voice steady, my questions casual, my eyes relaxed. Meanwhile, inside, it felt like someone had hooked jumper cables to my ribs. Riley called it maintaining the facade. I called it hell. We worked mostly at night, the office lit by blue monitor glow and streetlights leaking through the blinds. Riley's laptop fans whirred constantly as she built the mirror environment, an isolated copy of our shared financial folders, time-stamped and locked so no one could alter the evidence trail. She muttered to herself as she coded, fingers flying, the scent of her spearmint gum mixing with stale office air. "Look at this," she said one night, spinning her screen toward me. "He didn't just alter formulas, he rotated the access tokens. See that?" I leaned closer. The screen was warm from the CPU. Why would he rotate them manually? To break the revision history chain. Amateur hour, honestly, she snorted. He thinks he's smarter than the system. He's not. Every night, we uncovered more. A private repo on his personal GitHub, with budget simulations matching the falsified numbers. A spreadsheet labeled Audit Optics Draft 3, where he rehearsed manipulated projections. A Slack thread with a trial manager. Just pad the hours, she won't notice. My jaw tightened so hard it hurt. And then we found the email that made my throat close. A message to a rival clinical tech firm's COO. "Once the audit passes, we can discuss integration. She's distracted enough to pull this off." Distracted enough. Like my leadership was a flaw he could bank on. Like I was an obstacle, not a founder. I had to put my hands flat on the desk to keep from shaking. The vents rattled overhead, pushing cold air across my arms. "Riley," I whispered, "he was setting me up." Her expression darkened. "Yeah, but he's not going to finish the job." By the 10th day, we had everything. Altered models, email chains, shell company routing, metadata signatures, the GitHub repo, token rotations, Slack deletions, an entire timeline of fraud that even the most compromised board member couldn't ignore. We drafted a strategy, one that made my skin prickle just thinking about it. First, we'd present Daniel an innocently phrased question during our Monday leadership sync. Could he walk me through some inconsistencies in the trial budgets? He'd try to talk around them. He always did. That was what we were counting on. Because behind the scenes, Riley would be recording the entire exchange, with the mirror environment open and evidence ready to surface piece by piece. Then once he'd committed to the lie out loud, we'd drop the full packet. Printed, tabbed, time-stamped, unalterable. I kept playing the scene over in my head, rehearsing lines while trying to ignore the tightness in my chest. The night before the confrontation, Riley sent a text. "Riley. Ready." My fingers shook slightly as I typed back. "Mate. Tomorrow morning." She replied with one word. "Riley. Recording." I set my phone down. The office was silent except for the soft hum of the exit sign. My heart thudded steadily, fear and resolve in equal measure. Tomorrow, everything would change. And I wasn't sure if I was more terrified or relieved. The morning of the confrontation, I woke before my alarm, heart pounding, mouth dry, sheets twisted around my legs like I'd been fighting in my sleep. For a moment I lay still, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside my apartment window, trying to breathe through the pressure sitting hard on my sternum. It felt like something was lodged beneath my ribs, a solid weight of dread and clarity mixed together. I got dressed slowly. Blazer, charcoal, blouse, deep blue. Pants pressed the night before because my hands had been too shaky to trust myself with the steamer this morning. When I slipped on my shoes, I realized my fingers were trembling again. I forced them to still by gripping the counter until my knuckles whitened. The elevator ride to the office felt like ascending into war. Each floor dinged too loud, echoing off the metal walls. When the doors opened, the scent of brewing coffee drifted through the air, and the faint clicking of keyboards told me a few early risers were already in. Riley stood near my office door, leaning casually against the frame. She wore a hoodie and jeans like it was any other day, but her eyes were sharp, alert. She held her phone in her hand and gave me a small nod. "Mic check," she murmured. I touched the tiny recorder clipped inside my blazer. "Working." "Good," she stepped aside. "I'll come in when the time is right." I walked into my office just as Daniel arrived, latte in hand, Patagonia vest zipped halfway, cedar cologne trailing behind him like always. He smiled that same calm smile, the one that used to soothe me, the one that now made my stomach twist. "Morning, Alexis," he said, voice smooth. "You wanted to sync earlier today." "Yes," I said, moving to my desk. "Please shut the door." He raised an eyebrow but complied, closing it with a soft click. The room felt smaller instantly, the HVAC rattling overhead like a warning. I gestured to the chair across from me. "Have a seat." He sat, crossing one leg neatly over the other. "What's on your mind?" I took a slow breath. "I found something strange in the clinical cost models. Can you walk me through this?" I slid the first printed page across the desk. "Exchange 1." He didn't look concerned. "Sure, this one, probably just a formatting issue." "Exchange 2." "A formatting issue that repeats across 8 months?" I asked. He shrugged. "It happens, these things get messy." "Exchange 3." I slid the next page toward him, then explained the overwritten formulas. Daniel's jaw tightened barely a millimeter. I updated them manually to correct rounding inconsistencies. Exchange 4. "Rounding inconsistencies don't total $4.7 million, I said softly. His smile faltered, but only for a heartbeat. "Alexis, you're reading too much into this." Exchange 5. "Am I?" I tapped the second packet. "Then why were these edits made at 2:17 a.m., and why do the vendor invoices show entirely different amounts?" He cleared his throat. "You're being emotional about this." Exchange 6. I felt heat rise in my face, but my voice stayed even. "Stop calling me emotional, explain the numbers." He leaned back, adopting that patronizing calmness. "You're under pressure, the audit is coming. These are small adjustments to keep the board comfortable. Optics matter." Exchange 7. So you altered financial records for optics. His tone sharpened. Don't twist my words. Exchange 8. I slid the shell company filing across the desk, then explained Medfield Analytics LLC. For the first time, his composure cracked. His fingers curled against his knee. That's a consulting entity, completely legal. Exchange 9. And the invoices routed through it, the ones you coded into our trial budgets as if they came from the CRO. His throat bobbed. Those were temporary. Exchange 10. Temporary fraud, I asked. The word hit him like a blow. He leaned forward, voice low and urgent. Listen, we can fix this. Exchange 11. No, I said, you can't talk around this anymore. He opened his mouth, probably to deny it again, but that's when Riley stepped into the doorway, phone raised, expression cool as ice. Exchange 12. Actually, she said, she can prove every detail. Daniel whipped his head toward her. What is this? You planned this, you trapped me. I stood, palms flat on the desk. My hands were no longer shaking. No, I said quietly. You trapped yourself, I just documented it. His face crumpled, anger, fear, realization all colliding at once. He stood abruptly, knocking his knee into the desk. His latte tipped, splashing across a corner of the printouts. You think you can fire me over this, he hissed. You think you can destroy my career. I held his gaze. Your career destroyed itself the moment you decided I was too distracted to notice you stealing from me. He froze, the exact words, the nail in his coffin. Riley tapped her phone screen, and with that we're done. Daniel looked between us, eyes wide and hollow. That was the moment he knew he'd lost. The minutes after Daniel stormed out of my office felt strangely quiet, like the building itself was holding its breath. The air smelled faintly of his spilled latte, burnt espresso, and sweet foam mixing with the usual office dust and cold HVAC draft. Riley closed the door gently behind him, then turned to me. You okay? She asked. I was not even close, but I nodded anyway. We had work to do. Within 15 minutes, IT suspended his access, email, financial systems, VPN, Slack, everything. Notifications pinged across my laptop in rapid succession, each one a tiny justice strike, access revoked, token invalid, login attempt denied. I watched them without blinking, my chest tight but steady. By noon, the emergency board meeting was assembled. I walked into the conference room carrying 2 binders, one with evidence, one with the mirror environment logs. My legs felt like they were made of iron, but my mind was sharp. The board members sat around the long table, murmuring, clicking pens, shifting in expensive chairs. Some looked irritated, some looked curious, one looked like he already thought I was overreacting. I shut the door behind me, and the room fell silent. We need to address immediate misconduct, I said. My voice didn't shake. I slid the first binder onto the table. Daniel has falsified clinical trial financials, routed invoices through a shell company, deleted audit trails, and manipulated models tied directly to our FDA partnership. Aaron, the board member who'd gently gaslit me 2 days prior, inhaled sharply. That's a bold claim, Alexis. I opened the binder to the metadata trail. It's not a claim, it's a timeline. For the next 20 minutes, I walked them through everything: timestamps, altered values, shell company filings, email directives, Slack deletions. Riley stood beside me, flipping pages, occasionally pointing to a signature or a code snippet. The room gradually changed temperature, skepticism cooling into unease, unease hardening into shock. The board chair, a woman who rarely emoted, leaned forward. These numbers, these aren't rounding errors. No, I said, they're fraud. And the audit is in 9 days, she murmured, pressing her fingertips together. Aaron cleared his throat. We need to be absolutely certain before taking action. Riley scoffed under her breath. I met his eyes. You want certainty? I tapped the second binder. He admitted intent on recorded audio this morning. His face drained. After that, everything moved fast. A unanimous vote, immediate termination for cause. Another vote, refer findings to regulatory counsel for mandatory reporting. Legal drafted the notice. It prepared the separation file. HR completed the paperwork. By 4 p.m., Daniel's employee account was fully scrubbed from our systems except for the preserved evidence environment. One board member pulled me aside afterward, her voice quiet. "I underestimated you. I won't make that mistake again." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt emptied out, like all the adrenaline holding my body together had drained through the soles of my shoes. The regulatory notifications went out that evening. FDA Partnership Liaison, State Compliance Board, SEC Counsel. The rival firm Daniel had been whispering to send a statement within hours, distancing themselves from him, so fast it almost made me laugh. By the end of the week, whispers spread through the industry. Clinical finance circles talked, recruiters backed off. His LinkedIn went from CFO visionary strategist to seeking new opportunities to private altogether. But even as the world caught up with what he'd done, the cost on my end piled up. I hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night. I ate whatever I could grab: apple slices, protein bars, vending machine crackers. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw spreadsheets and missing commas and red flags I'd ignored. It was over. But the damage inside me felt far from done. For 8 months after Daniel's removal, my life became a rotation of depositions, audits, system rebuilds, and long nights staring at ceiling tiles I knew too well. The initial relief of exposing him evaporated quickly, replaced by the grinding machinery of cleanup, regulators asking for clarifications, investors wanting reassurance, team members whispering in corners, wondering how something this big had slipped past all of us. The first deposition lasted 6 hours. I remember the conference room being too cold, the air smelling faintly of carpet cleaner and stale water bottles. Daniel sat across from me with a lawyer I'd never met, shoulders hunched, tie crooked. He didn't make eye contact, not once. His lawyer tried everything, reframing, minimizing, pushing the narrative that Daniel had been overwhelmed or misunderstood. But the evidence was airtight. Whenever he hesitated, Riley would shift beside me, sliding another tabbed page across the table like a quiet gavel. By hour 4, Daniel's voice had gone flat, monotone, stripped of its usual confidence. I walked out of that room shaking, not from fear, but from the emotional hangover of seeing how small someone looks once their power's been stripped away. Keeping the company alive took everything else I had. We spent $340,000 on legal fees alone, money I hadn't budgeted for, money I felt in my bones every time I approved another invoice. Our clinical partners needed reassurance, and I spent countless hours on calls explaining how the manipulation hadn't touched patient safety or trial integrity. Some conversations were painful, others surprised me. Cedars West stayed. Silveridge renewed. Kaiser Regional's CIO told me, "Honestly, I trust you more now." Leaders who clean house are the ones who last. But rebuilding trust internally was harder. I held all-hands meetings where my voice wavered at the start, then steadied as the questions came. I opened the books. I instituted new controls. I hired a controller with 20 years of clinical finance experience and brought Riley back as Director of Forensics and Compliance, something I never expected she'd say yes to. She did. Slowly, the ground beneath my feet stopped feeling like it might crack open at any moment. 3 months later, we closed our Series B $4 million at a valuation I'd once only dreamed about. When I signed the term sheet, my hands didn't shake. Not even a little. Still, the scars stayed. I triple-checked every access log. I woke up some nights at 3 a.m. with my heart pounding, convinced I'd missed something, some hint, some whisper of risk hiding in a spreadsheet. Trauma lingers even after truth wins. As for Daniel, last I heard he was doing contract bookkeeping for a mid-tier consulting firm outside Sacramento. No equity, no title, LinkedIn hidden, the kind of role you take when you're trying to outrun the wreckage behind you. Sometimes I wonder if he ever thinks about what he did. If he remembers the morning I slid those papers across my desk. If he replayed the moment he realized I wasn't the one who was too emotional. He was the one who'd confused arrogance for intelligence, confidence for impunity. But those thoughts fade faster now. Because in the end, I survived. I rebuilt. I learned to trust my instincts even when others told me to sit down, calm down, quiet down. I learned that leadership isn't about being unshakable, it's about standing up even when your voice is trembling. And if you've stayed with me through this whole story, if you've ever felt that sting of being dismissed while someone undermined you in the dark, you already know why I had to tell it. Some nights I still wake at 3 a.m., chest tight, breath shallow. But then I remind myself, I made it through. And knowing someone out there understands, that's what keeps me standing.